The divorce papers sat on my desk like a jury verdict. 12 years of marriage reduced to 23 pages of legal language and signatures I hadn't yet forced myself to make. I stared at them during my lunch break, alone in my office on the 42nd floor, watching the city move below me with the kind of purposeful energy I hadn't felt in months. My name is Michael Chen, 42 years old, and I was about to become another statistic. The papers had been prepared by my attorney last week. I'd read through them once, then deliberately avoided looking at them again. Part of me hoped that if I didn't acknowledge them, they wouldn't be real. But they were real, just like the distance between me and my wife Sarah had become real over the past 3 years. I could pinpoint the exact moment everything shifted, though I'd never be able to explain it to anyone's satisfaction. It wasn't a single fight or betrayal. It was more like watching someone you love slowly transform into a stranger living in your house. We'd stopped laughing. Then we'd stopped talking. Then we'd started keeping score of every forgotten birthday reminder, every late night at work, every dinner where we sat in silence pretending the news on television was more interesting than the person across the table. Sarah had stopped trying around the time my promotion came through. She'd wanted me to turn it down, wanted me to stay in my old position where the hours were manageable and weekends were actually mine. I'd taken the promotion anyway. Career ambition, I'd told myself, was about security, about building something. She'd said nothing in response, but I'd felt the withdrawal like a physical thing, a door closing somewhere deep inside her that I didn't know how to reopen. For the past year, we'd been living parallel lives in the same apartment. She'd go to bed by 10. I'd work until midnight. She'd eat breakfast before I woke up. I'd return home to find her already sequestered in the guest room with a book, claiming she needed to finish it before book club. The guest room had become her bedroom somewhere along the way, though we'd never explicitly discussed it. It had just happened, like so many things had just happened without actual words being exchanged between us. Last month, I'd finally said the words out loud. I think we should consider separation. I'd expected her to cry, to argue, to fight for us in some way. Instead, she'd simply nodded and said, "Okay." That single word, delivered so quietly, so absolutely without emotion, had broken something in me that I hadn't realized was still whole. I'd called the lawyer the next day, but sitting here with the papers, I found myself unable to make that final move. My finger hovered over my phone. I could call the attorney, ask her to email them to Sarah, set the wheels in motion. 12 years, and it could all be officially over within a month. We didn't even have kids to complicate things. Our separation would be clean and efficient, much like our marriage had become. That's when my phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. "Don't forget the Hendersons' dinner tonight. 7:30. Please try to be home by 6 so we can leave together." The Hendersons. I'd completely forgotten. They were Sarah's friends from her book club, though they'd become couples friends over the years. The last thing I wanted was to spend an evening making small talk and pretending everything was fine. But Sarah had asked, and after everything, I didn't have the heart to refuse her this one last thing. I glanced at the divorce papers again, then deliberately turned them face down on my desk. I'd figure out what to do with them after tonight. Maybe the fresh air and a change of scenery would give me clarity. Maybe I could finally find the words to tell Sarah that I was ready to let go, that I'd already started the process of moving on. I had no idea that by the end of the evening, I would understand nothing at all, and everything I needed to know. The Hendersons' penthouse apartment was exactly what I'd expected. All minimalist furniture, contemporary art, and the kind of quiet background music that was meant to be sophisticated, but just made everything feel sterile. Rebecca Henderson greeted us at the door with air kisses and white wine in crystal glasses that probably cost more than my first car. Sarah looked beautiful. She was wearing the blue dress I'd always loved, the one that matched her eyes perfectly. She'd done something different with her hair too, softer somehow. More vulnerable than the tight bun she'd been wearing lately. I felt a sharp pang in my chest watching her accept Rebecca's hug, watching her smile, that smile she reserved for people she actually wanted to see. That smile had been missing from my life for so long I'd almost forgotten what it looked like. We moved into the dining room where the other couples were already seated. Thomas and Melissa from the office, the Patels who lived 2 floors down from us, the Johnsons whom I'd met perhaps twice before, 6 couples. sitting around an enormous glass table laden with food that looked too beautiful to eat. Sarah took a seat between Melissa and Rebecca. I found myself across from her, close enough to see her but not close enough to talk to her without it being obvious to everyone. Dinner proceeded with the kind of conversations that happen at these gatherings, discussions about the new Thai restaurant downtown, complaints about the dry cleaner who'd ruined someone's coat, speculation about the new people moving into the building. I participated when expected, pushed food around my plate, and tried not to think about the divorce papers sitting on my desk. It was around the main course that I excused myself to use the bathroom. As I walked down the hallway, I passed by Rebecca's home office, and I didn't deliberately stop, but the door was slightly ajar, and I could see Sarah through the gap. She and Rebecca and Melissa had apparently broken away from the main group. I should have kept walking. I know that now. Instead, I paused. "He's such a good man," Sarah was saying, her voice soft but sincere. "Everyone sees Michael as this ambitious guy, this career-focused machine. But honestly, he's the only man who ever made me feel safe." My heart stopped. "Safe?" Rebecca asked. "But he's barely here, Sarah. I thought you two were—" "We are struggling," Sarah interrupted, and I could hear the thickness in her voice, like she was fighting back tears. "We've been struggling for a while now, but that's not about who he is at his core. It's about me, about us getting lost. But Michael, he's always been steady. When my father died, do you remember? I fell apart. Michael sat with me in the dark for hours without saying anything. He just held my hand. He never tried to fix it or make me feel better. He just was there. So why the distance?" Melissa asked gently. "Because I'm an idiot," Sarah said, and now there was a laugh in her voice, but it was the kind of laugh people make when they're simultaneously breaking apart. "I got angry about his promotion. I got angry that he was working too much, that he wasn't the person he was when we first met. But I never told him any of this. I just withdrew. And the worst part is now he's withdrawing too, and I'm terrified that I've pushed away the only person in my life who's ever made me feel like I was worth staying for." I couldn't breathe. "Have you told him this?" Rebecca asked. "I'm too proud," Sarah admitted. "We're both too proud, and I think we're too far gone now. He barely looks at me anymore. I sleep in the guest room because being in the same bed as someone who doesn't want you there is the loneliest feeling in the world." I stood there in the hallway, feeling like my entire understanding of the past 3 years was being rewritten in real time. I didn't go to the bathroom. Instead, I walked back to the dining room in a daze, my mind replaying Sarah's words like a broken record. She loved me. She still loved me. The distance wasn't indifference, it was pain, hurt, the kind of hurt that people create when they're too afraid to speak the truth. For 3 years, I'd been operating under the assumption that she'd fallen out of love with me, that the distance was her way of telling me we were done. I'd internalized her coldness as rejection, never once considering that it might be a form of self-protection. While I'd been planning my exit strategy, she'd been silently suffering, believing she'd already lost me. The dinner suddenly felt unbearable. I excused myself early, claiming a work emergency, and Sarah had simply nodded with that resigned expression I'd come to know so well. She didn't protest. She didn't ask questions. She just accepted that I was leaving, the way she'd come to accept all the other times I'd disappeared. The drive home was torture. Every red light felt personal. Every moment gave me time to think about the divorce papers on my desk, about how close I'd come to executing the very thing that would have devastated her most. When we got home, Sarah immediately retreated to the guest room with the excuse that she was tired. I sat in the living room, hands shaking, trying to figure out what to do with this knowledge that had fundamentally changed everything. I could ignore what I'd heard. I could sign the papers, serve them to her, and pretend I'd never overheard that conversation. The process would be less painful than trying to rebuild something that felt so broken. But even as the thought crossed my mind, I knew I couldn't do it. I'd heard my wife's heart, and now I had to do something about it. At midnight, I made a decision. I went to the guest room and gently knocked on the door. Sarah had been reading, and she startled at the sound, quickly setting her book aside. She was wearing an old t-shirt of mine that had somehow migrated to her closet, and seeing her in it, in something that belonged to me, made me feel like I was finally seeing clearly. "Can we talk?" I asked. She nodded slowly, cautiously, like I might be a wild animal she didn't want to startle. I sat on the edge of the bed, maintaining distance because I didn't trust myself not to fall apart if I got too close. I heard you at the dinner, I said quietly, in Rebecca's office. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but I heard you talking about me. Sarah's face went pale. She looked like she wanted to disappear. Michael, you said I made you feel safe, I continued. You said I was the only man who ever made you feel that way. I shouldn't have, she started, but I held up my hand. I need to say something, I interrupted gently. And then you can be as angry as you want. I was going to serve you with divorce papers. I had them drawn up. I was going to do it next week. I was sitting at my desk this afternoon staring at them, trying to convince myself it was the right thing to do. Sarah's eyes widened, and I watched her process this information with the kind of devastation that I hadn't realized I could still inflict on someone I'd been trying to leave. But then I heard you, I continued, and I realized something. I realized that we haven't failed because we fell out of love. We failed because we stopped communicating. We built walls instead of bridges, and I'm just as guilty as you are. What are you saying? Sarah whispered. I'm saying I don't want a divorce, I said. I'm saying I'm tired of being angry about the distance instead of trying to close it. I'm saying that if you're willing, I want to try again. I want to fight for us. Not because everything will automatically be okay, but because what we have is worth fighting for. Sarah started crying, silent tears rolling down her cheeks. I thought I'd lost you, she said. I thought I'd pushed you so far away that you were already gone. I almost was gone, I admitted. But I didn't leave. I'm here. And I'm sorry for every moment I've made you feel like I wasn't choosing us. I'm sorry for shutting you out, she said. I'm sorry for letting pride matter more than our relationship. I moved closer and took her hands in mine. So what do we do now? Sarah looked at me with red-rimmed eyes and the ghost of a smile. We start talking. Really talking. Not about bills and schedules, but about what we need, what we've been missing. And therapy, I added. I think we need professional help figuring out how we got here and how to build back from it. Okay, she nodded. But Michael, I need you to understand something. I can't do the distance anymore. I can't be married to someone who feels absent. It doesn't matter how successful you are or how much money you make. I need you present. I need to feel like I matter. You do matter, I said fiercely. You've always mattered. I just forgot to show it. But I'm going to change that. The first week after that night was awkward in a way that was somehow comforting. Sarah moved back to our bedroom, but we didn't rush into intimacy. Instead, we talked. For hours at a time. We'd sit in bed with the lights off, and we'd tell each other things we'd been keeping locked away. How lonely Sarah had felt when I'd gotten so consumed with work. How rejected she'd experienced my promotion. Not because she wasn't proud of me, but because she'd interpreted it as a choice between her and my career. How I'd interpreted her withdrawal as a lack of love, when it had actually been a desperate cry for connection that I'd been too blind to hear. I didn't know, I told her one night, 3 days into our renewal. When you stopped sharing things with me, I thought it was because you didn't want me to know. I didn't realize you were waiting for me to ask, and I expected you to notice without me having to tell you, she admitted. I was being unfair. I was punishing you for not being a mind reader. We were both being unfair, I said. But we're here now. That has to count for something. I called my attorney and had the divorce papers destroyed. I requested a sabbatical from work, something I never would have done a month ago. My boss was shocked but accommodating. He'd been expecting my performance to decline anyway, he said, noting that I'd seemed distracted lately. The truth was that work had consumed me precisely because I'd been running from the emptiness at home. Sarah and I booked our first therapy session for the following Tuesday. We sat in a small office with a woman named Dr. Patricia Morrison, who had kind eyes and the sort of calm presence that made you want to unload all your problems immediately. We spent that first session explaining how we'd gotten here, taking turns telling our side of the story. I watched Sarah's face as she talked about the pain of feeling abandoned, and I felt a deep shame that I'd caused her that suffering. The thing about long-term relationships, Dr. Morrison explained, is that they require active maintenance. Many couples go through phases where they assume love is enough, that because the foundation is solid, the structure can survive neglect. But buildings crumble without upkeep, so do marriages. What do we do to fix it? Sarah asked, reaching over and taking my hand. It was the most physical affection we'd shared in months, and it felt revolutionary. You start small, Dr. Morrison said. You create rituals. You designate time that belongs only to each other. You become curious about each other again instead of assuming you already know everything. And you remember that your partner is not your enemy. The distance is. We left that appointment with homework. Each of us was supposed to write down 10 things we loved about each other. Not the big gestures or accomplishments, but the small things that made us feel known and chosen. We were also instructed to have one dinner per week, where we weren't allowed to discuss work, bills, or anything related to our external lives. We were only allowed to talk about our internal worlds, our dreams, our fears, our hopes. That Friday, I made the dinner myself. Nothing fancy, just Sarah's favorite pasta with fresh basil and homemade sauce, a salad with her preferred dressing, and a simple dessert of chocolate-covered strawberries. We sat at the dining room table with candles and actual plates instead of eating on the couch while watching television. So, I said, handing her the list I'd written, 10 things I love about you that have nothing to do with how you look or what you do for a living. Sarah read through it silently, and I watched her face soften with each item. 1. The way you laugh at your own jokes before you finish telling them. 2. How you always leave space on the bed for me even when I'm not home yet. 3. The fact that you remember everyone's birthday, even people you've only met once. 4. Your ability to find humor in the most frustrating situations. 5. The way you move through the world with such deliberate kindness. 6. Your courage in admitting when you're wrong. 7. The tenderness in your voice when you talk about the future. 8. Your fierce loyalty to people you love. 9. The way you make me want to be a better person. 10. The simple fact that you chose me, and you're choosing me again. When she finished reading, she was crying again, but this time it was the kind of crying that felt like healing. I did the same thing, she said, handing me her list. I read through it, and with each item, I felt something that had been locked away inside me for years beginning to thaw. 3 months later, I barely recognized the man I'd been before that dinner party. The divorce papers had been destroyed, shredded into confetti that represented all the ways I'd almost destroyed my marriage. I'd reduced my work hours, delegating projects to colleagues who were hungry for advancement. Sarah had asked if I was compromising my career, and I'd told her the truth. My career had never asked me to lose myself. Only I had done that. We'd committed to therapy as a couple, sessions becoming as routine as brushing our teeth. We had dinner together every night now, actually present for it instead of checking our phones or thinking about tomorrow. We took a weekend trip to the coastal town where we'd first met, and we'd spent the entire time talking about the people we'd been then. Optimistic, open, unafraid of vulnerability. We made a pact to become those people again, not by running from our adult responsibilities, but by bringing that same openness and wonder to our marriage as we had in the beginning. The most surprising thing was how much easier the second chapter was than the first. Because now we weren't learning each other, we were remembering each other. We were excavating the love that had always been there, buried under pride and miscommunication and the daily weight of living. One evening, I came home early from work, something I made a point of doing now, and found Sarah in the kitchen preparing dinner. She was humming, something she used to do years ago, and the sound filled the apartment with a lightness that I'd almost forgotten existed. "Rough day?" she asked, handing me a glass of wine. "Not at all," I said. "Actually, I did something today. I requested a formal schedule change at work. I'm stepping down from the management position, taking on a role with less responsibility and less travel, more money, less hours, better work-life balance." Sarah's eyes widened. "Michael, that was your dream position." "No," I said, moving closer to her. "That was what I thought was my dream. My actual dream was always you, a life with you, a partnership that didn't require me to sacrifice everything else. I just didn't realize it until I almost lost it." "You didn't lose me," she said softly. "We almost lost each other, but we didn't. Because you were brave enough to fight for us even when I wasn't," I said. "Because you kept loving me even when it would have been easier not to. Because when I wasn't looking, you were holding on to who we were supposed to be." That night we made love for the first time in months. It wasn't about passion or physical need. It was about reconnection. It was about two people choosing each other again. actively and consciously after having nearly let each other go. It was intimate in a way that sex hadn't been between us in years. It was tender and vulnerable, and filled with the kind of presence that can only come from truly seeing another person. Afterward, lying in bed with Sarah curled against my chest, I thought about how close I'd come to signing those papers, how different my life would be now if I'd been just a little bit braver in my cowardice, if I hadn't overheard that conversation, if I'd let pride win instead of love. "I'm sorry I almost lost us," I whispered into the darkness. "You didn't," Sarah said. "We both almost lost us. And I'm sorry I made it so hard for you to find me again." "You didn't make it hard," I corrected gently. "You made it possible. You kept the light on even when you thought I'd already left." The next morning I called the Hendersons and asked if they'd like to have dinner with us soon. Rebecca seemed surprised. I was usually the reluctant participant in social gatherings. But when I explained that Sarah and I had something to celebrate, she was delighted to host. 2 weeks later, we sat in their penthouse again, but everything felt different. Sarah held my hand during dinner. I made a point of looking at her when she spoke. We laughed together, really laughed, not the polite sound of people going through the motions. Rebecca pulled me aside at one point and asked what had changed. I listened. I told her simply. I finally really listened to what my wife was trying to tell me, and I fought for her instead of running away. When we got home that night, Sarah and I sat on the balcony of our apartment, looking out at the city lights. We didn't need to talk. We were just present together, two people who had been lost and found their way back to each other. "Thank you," Sarah said after a while. "For what?" I asked. "For not signing the papers," she said. "For being willing to start over. For choosing us." I squeezed her hand gently. "Thank you for defending me to your friends. For keeping your heart open even when I'd shut mine. Thank you for being patient with me while I figured out what actually matters." "So what does matter?" she asked. "Now that you've figured it out?" "This," I said, gesturing at nothing in particular and everything at the same time. "You, us, the life we're building together. The person I become when I'm with you. That's what matters." Sarah leaned her head on my shoulder, and we sat there as the night deepened around us. Two people who had almost let love slip away, now holding it carefully, consciously, with the knowledge of how precious it truly was. The divorce papers that had seemed so inevitable just months ago felt like a bad dream now. They represented the man I'd almost become. Someone who ran from difficulty instead of facing it. Someone who took love for granted until it was too late. But that wasn't who I was, or at least it wasn't who I chose to be anymore. Life, I'd learned, is not about never making mistakes. It's about being willing to see them, own them, and fight to do better. And if you're lucky, if you have someone willing to fight alongside you, you get a second chance. A chance to build something stronger than what came before. Because now you know how fragile it can be. I'd been ready to divorce my wife, but I was far more ready to love her. And that, I realized, made all the difference.